Welcome, Swagatham, Vanakkam. In this video, I deal with an issue of tremendous contemporary significance. And that's the most worrisome sociological phenomenon, sociological, psychological, spiritual, cultural phenomenon of suicide. I think and speak in the context of Kerala. Kerala, unfortunately, leads the rest of the states and union territories in India in this most unfortunate aspect of social pathology, social illness. Recently, we had the instance of a young man taking his life because a lady who wanted to increase her reach in YouTube created a video in which he was reportedly unfairly accused of molesting her while they were traveling in a transport bus. Not able to cope with the public infamy this meant, a young man at the age of 43, his name was Deepak, he took his life. This became, of course, a point of intense, heated media discussion for a couple of days, and now, as is the general practice, is completely forgotten, and the tragedy of Deepak has been consigned to the waste basket of oblivion. But I have been thinking on the subject ever since, and asking myself this question as to why it is that despite the circumstances of life improving very substantially in Kerala and other parts of India, suicide rates are actually skyrocketing. On a kind of modest estimation, about 150,000 people commit suicide in India annually. And given the fact that great social opprobrium is attached to it, sociologists tell us that only one case out of 5 would be reported. If you go by that calculation, then we should come to a staggering number, like 600,000 people committing suicide in India annually. This is a Holocaust. But not enough attention is paid to this phenomenon, and certainly not enough effort is made to understand it aright. Why do people commit suicide? And those of us who are familiar with the novels of Dostoevsky also know that suicide figures quite often in the novels of Dostoevsky, and he has his own understanding of it, but this is not the time for me to take you into those possibilities of thought and investigation, because that will take too much of our time. I'm just suggesting a possibility and retreating from it. Now, certainly one idea from Dostoevsky I need to mention here, and that is, Dostoevsky points out that suicide usually results out of a disharmony between a person and his inner condition. Or to put it somewhat in the words of Dostoevsky, when the soul finds that the body is too inhospitable to live in it, it says goodbye. And certainly there is an interesting insight, and I'll come to that presently. Now, in this video, my main argument is derived from a very ancient thinker called Plotinus, Plotinus. Now, Plotinus lived about 200 years before Jesus, and I think he was born 204 BC, and he lived for about 66 years and died. But he's left behind some very profound works, and one of them is titled On the Beautiful. On the Beautiful. Now, Plotinus argues that every human being must be heedful of a very basic duty, and that is the duty to enhance the beauty of one's inner life. What's our primary duty according to Plotinus? It's the duty to increase the beauty of our inner life. So therefore, for the rest of the time, I'm going to invite your attention to be focused on the notes I have made based on Plotinus' very small book titled On the Beautiful. So let's turn to those notes. Now, Plotinus asked the question, it's all right to say that we must enhance the beauty of our inner life. It's also called spiritual beauty, inner beauty, the beauty of our inner person, as against what is seen outside. And outside is mere appearance. It has its own value. I'm not saying that we should completely neglect our external appearance, but the only thing is that truthful life means that the external appearance harmonizes with the inner reality. Otherwise, you'll be living a life of hypocrisy, in which there's a contradiction between what we are inside of us and what we appear to be. And Shakespeare deals with this issue in Hamlet. Here again, I limit myself to a reference. And this issue is most focused in a character called Gertrude, who is Hamlet's mother, who is leading a life of immoral hypocrisy. And Hamlet, her son, becomes aware of it, and he confronts her. And through that confrontation, Shakespeare presents this theme of the contradiction between inner reality and outward appearance. Now, let me, in this video, stick entirely to Plotinus. Now, before I do that, one small word of explanation. You might well ask me why I'm referring to these authors who are so ancient. Why can't you actually base your thinking on more recent books? Of course, there are more recent books dealing with this topic. But my attempt through this channel, I don't call it a channel really, I don't think of it as a channel, but in the interest of practical convenience, just call it a channel. I think of it as a YouTube fellowship, but let's call it a channel, doesn't matter. Now, one of the stated purposes of this channel is to widen our mental awareness, to enlarge the range of our acquaintance, and therefore I deliberately pick and choose works from different cultures, different periods, and with an accent on classical works, because in my experience, if you really want to get to the depth of things, you need classical thinkers. So I pick and choose somebody who was born in Egypt, but did much of his work in Rome and died in Rome, Plotinus. And I consider his thinking very close to the thinking in the New Testament, thinking of Jesus Christ, though Plotinus lived a little more than 2 centuries before Jesus. Okay, let's proceed. Now, Plotinus in this book, tiny volume, the title is On the Beautiful. You can see my notes. You can actually take notes on this and be very precise in our understanding. Plotinus asks a question, what are the ingredients of this inner beauty? It's all right to say that you should be beautiful inside of you, but please tell us, what are the ingredients of this inner beauty? Now here, I'm going to stick strictly, entirely to what Plotinus has stated in this book. First of all, he says, inner beauty depends on the amplitude of your soul. Amplitude means the range. The smaller you are, the less beautiful. And if your soul is only obsessed with yourself, you're far away from beauty, you begin to be ugly. So selfishness is ugly. And your beauty depends on the amplitude of your soul. And it's precisely because of this that Jesus says, you must be the light of the world. That must be your amplitude. That must be your amplitude, the whole world. The range of your soul must be such that you embrace the human condition globally, universally. So that's amplitude of the soul. Now here, let me make a passing reference to the great Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore, who raises this question in a very small book, about 130 pages, titled Nationalism, where Tagore says, if someone asks me the question whether I love my country or humanity first, unhesitatingly I would say I would love humanity. In contrast to this, we today live in an India where loving anything other than India is considered disloyalty to India. Our souls are shrinking. And this is a far more aggravated problem within religion, where each sect claims exclusive loyalty from its adherents. And therefore, people's souls are shrinking rather than expanding. And correspondingly, people are becoming, because of their religion, uglier and uglier and uglier. And the consequences are there for all to see. So the first thing that Plotinus says, that we must increase the amplitude of our soul. The problem with the Jews was that they restricted the range of their soul to their religion, to their region, to their race, to their religion. So that is actually, if you consult Francis Bacon on this, he would say that this is actually idolatry. The basic principle in idolatry is equating something small with God, who is larger than the cosmos. So it's very important to increase the amplitude of our soul. It's particularly important in the Indian context today, where narrow-mindedness and the intolerance that's born of narrow-mindedness is considered some kind of national vitality. Nothing can be farther from the truth. The second thing that Plotinus mentioned is the cultivation of just manners. Not fashionable manners, just manners. That is, conducting yourself appropriately, depending on the amplitude of your soul, or as Jesus would say, according to the inner light, conducting towards justly, fairly, towards all people. Okay. The third thing he mentions in connection with the beauty of the soul is pure temperance. Temperance is not going into excesses. Don't fly into rage. Don't sort of become slavish. Don't become dead. What Aristotle, in that wonderful book titled Ethics, calls the middle path. The middle path. So pure temperance. The fourth item that Plotinus mentions is modesty and honesty, walking with an intrepid step and a tranquil, steady aspect. Modesty, of course, do not show off, do not be arrogant, haughty, proud, insolent. Honesty, being truthful in all that you think, do, and say, and being that with an intrepid, that is fearless state. Be modest and honest in a fearless condition, and with a tranquil and steady aspect. Aspect is how you present yourself. Okay, be tranquil and steady. So that contributes to the beauty of your inner life. The next thing that Plotinus mentions is what crowns the beauty of them all: constantly receiving the radiance of a divine intellect. Oh, that's beautiful. Your inner soul must be constantly irradiated, constantly illumined by what? By a divine intellect, the intellect of God. So your intelligence must be in tune with the intelligence of God. Now, in contrast, of course, and I have put that in brackets, we can think of those who have or who are burdened with souls of darkness, inner light versus inner darkness. And in great works like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, Macbeth by Shakespeare, the title characters, the lead characters like Raskolnikov and Macbeth, can be thought of in this context as dramatizations of the souls of darkness. And Raskolnikov confesses his crime and is spiritually regenerated, whereas Macbeth dies a death of pure despair and nihilism and hopelessness. So, inner darkness. Now, I make a reference to three writers here. All of them are philosophers: Aristotle, Fichte, Kant, chronological order. All three of them say in their writings, in their ethical writings, all of them say that virtue determines whether or not we deserve happiness. So these three, right, and there are several others like them, but I thought I would make three references. All the three authors, Aristotle, Fichte, and Kant, they say that your capacity for happiness is determined by your commitment to virtue. Or, to put in general terms, your capacity for happiness is determined by your inner light. In this context, I want to make a reference to the Beatitudes that Jesus taught. As all of us know, that Gandhi was tremendously fond of this particular aspect of the Sermon on the Mount. Gandhi was in love with Sermon on the Mount as a whole, the Gospel of Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, but he was particularly attached to the Beatitudes. Now, Beatitudes means happiness. So here, Jesus is enunciating the various principles of happiness. Now, this is not the time for me to take each one of them and discuss, but I need to say that the Beatitudes that Jesus taught as the essential ingredients of human happiness, or the inner beauty of a human being, constitute a level change in virtue. For example, Aristotle would never teach that you should thirst and hunger after righteousness, or that you should suffer for your righteousness and derive happiness from it, or that you are blessed when people revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you, etc., etc. So that's a far higher level of ethical steadfastness. And that, according to Jesus, is your inner strength. Jesus also talked about the lamp within Matthew chapter 5, verses 14, 15, 16. He says there is a light hidden within you. That's your inner wealth. Let that light shine, and let that light illumine the world around you. So when that happens, the world around you recognizes your inner beauty. This will also, when individuals do that, when individuals develop according to the insights that Plotinus provides, that Jesus provides, and many others like them provide, then what will happen is that the law and order situation in a society will automatically improve. In contradistinction to this, people in the secular world think that by increasing the number of laws and making each law as draconian as possible, the law and order in a society will improve. I'm not saying that laws are irrelevant and totally useless, but I certainly believe, based on empirical evidence, hard facts, witness of history, that law is a very limited instrument. Law can only punish misdeeds. It cannot inspire noble behavior, nor can it enable people or motivate people to attain this inner beauty that Plotinus talks about, that Jesus talks about, that the philosophers who are concerned about the ethical health of humanity talked about. People like Aristotle, people like Plato, people like Fichte, people like Kant, and so on and so forth, talked about. So when the inner beauty is lost, what happens is we become afraid of confronting ourselves. Human beings, now that I've finished the notes, let me change the direction of the camera. There are only two conditions possible for us: that we are able to look inside with happiness and a sense of confidence, realizing that by the grace of God, we have been able to measure up to these norms that Plotinus has listed, and Jesus has presented in so many ways throughout his teaching, then if you are living according to these things, you'll be able to look inside and confront ourselves, not only without flinching, not only without feeling a sense of self-revulsion, but also with a sense of pride, happiness, and overflowing gratitude to God. That's a beautiful condition. On the contrary, you can also be in a state in which you're afraid to look within. And that's a state of unbearable burden. It's not possible to carry this burden for long. And it's when an individual comes to a conclusion that this burden is too much to bear and it's also utterly meaningless, that he or she comes to a conclusion that it's far better to end one's life than go on carrying this meaningless, crushing burden. And it is this, according to my understanding, that drives individuals to suicide. Otherwise, suicide is a monstrous contradiction, because the one thing that constitutes the bottom line of human nature and the nature of every creature with life is self-preservation. In fact, Dostoevsky is in one context says that this instinct of self-preservation is so strong in human beings that if you take a man and put him on a cliff where he has only space to stand on one leg, he would want to live or stay in that condition for 100 years. Such is the strength of the human commitment or the will to self-survival, the self-preservation. But then what happens is, or how does it happen, that this being the case, and this is common to every human being, so many people commit suicide. They destroy themselves. And the only explanation I can possibly offer is that suicide becomes the only option to people who cannot confront their inner life, who cannot look into themselves and derive any sense of happiness, solace, or confidence. Or rather, they are overwhelmed by a sense of self-revulsion, futility, meaningless, absurdity, and unworthiness. That they come to the conclusion that living in this state constitutes an absurd burden, and the only sensible thing to do, therefore, as Camus says in The Rebel, suicide is a profound and absolute statement of the meaninglessness of life. The Rebel by Albert Camus. I made a reference to this author in a previous video where I also spelled out the name. The Rebel by Albert Camus. So, my point therefore is, now I come to the social aspect of this. If so many people are committing suicide, and sometimes committing suicide even on flimsy grounds, there is a huge problem that we need to address. Please, for God's sake, do not think that by enunciating more and more laws, you will solve this problem. I can tell you one thing. Nobody will take his or her life simply because the challenges of life, the duties of life, the burdens of life are too unbearable. No, that's impossible. A person will come to this point of deciding that it's better to end one's life only when a person thinks that his or her life has become so meaningless, so disgusting, so inwardly unbearable, that the only thing to do, the only sensible thing to do is to end it, to have done with it. It is at this level that we need to engage with this problem. Therefore, the solution to this problem is not law. The solution to the problem, I sincerely and ardently believe, is an ethical and spiritual regeneration of our society. So people become aware of the need to invest in increasing the inner beauty of their personality, which also constitutes their inner strength, which stands by them in good stead in hours of trial and tribulation, the moments of crisis, in times when the storm of life beats hard upon them. It enables them to stand steadfast without toppling over. It is this agenda that needs to be recognized and engaged with. Unfortunately, nobody is talking about it. Not even churches, not even the leaders of other religions in Kerala or anywhere in the world. Nothing but a radical regeneration of the human nature will do. And the only solution, the only panacea, the only antidote to this epidemic problem is a spiritual regeneration of our species. This is exactly where spirituality comes into the whole agenda of healing a society. It's not only individuals, but also the society itself that needs healing. Then it's because of the sickness of the society that the members who are nurtured with it also get infected with it, and the skyrocketing rates of suicide in India and other parts of the world are a clear and loud proclaimer of the fact that our society is sick and we are all infected with the illness of that society. The society can be healed, and that's the good news. But it will not be healed by law and more legislation. It will be healed only when a people turn towards light rather than darkness. Thank you. Jai Hind.